Welcome everyone to Cantus Firmus at the Movies. I have as my guest today Keith Giles. We are discussing the 1986 film The Mission. And so Keith, I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about your background. And so my understanding is that you were at one point a pastor, is that correct?
Yeah, yes, I was. I was licensed and ordained and as a Southern Baptist pastor, golly, I guess about 27 years ago or so, and have served. I served at Southern Baptist churches, of course, in the beginning, but then when we moved to California, that was in Texas, and when we moved to California, my wife and I got involved in the Vineyard Church, and I basically have done everything except senior pastor. So I was a associate pastor, youth minister, music minister, children's pastor. We did compassion ministries, which was ministry to the poor in a community and stuff. So I've done a whole bunch of things, over those years. And
Right. And so I think at this point you're kind of a little bit more connected with like sort of an organic house church kind of movement.
yeah,
Is that correct?
yeah. So about, I guess it's now 11 years ago. My wife and I, we were at a church here in California. It was a Vineyard church that we had helped to plant from scratch. First time we'd ever done that was some friends of ours. And it was amazing. It was really a wonderful experience to plant a church, especially with friends in ministry. And we were doing children's ministry and compassion ministry again, which was ministry to the poor in the community here in California. And we did that for about 3.5 years. And around that time, near the end of that 3.5 years, my wife and I started feeling the Lord speak to us about leaving to start to plant another church. And we thought that would be great. Prayed about it and, just decided, okay, God will do it. And it was sort of like after we had said yes to God that we would do that, then the next thing the Lord said to us was he wanted us to plant a church where 100% of the offerings collected all of it went to care for the poor in the community, and none of it went to like my salary or a building or a sound system or equipment for the worship band or any of that, not even coffee and donuts. We were excited about that vision. Really, I thought I just couldn't imagine someone saying, hey, where do you go to church? Oh, we go to this church where all of the offering is given to the poor in the community and no one takes a salary. And be like, what? Who does that? So we were really excited about that. We thought, wow, that's awesome. And that was really in our minds, patterned after some studying that we had done about the early church, and poor DNA for the early church was caring for the poor, the orphans and the widow, and even the Romans in the first century complained that the Christians were burying not only their own dead but the Roman, the pagan dead. And like, why would they do that? It was just an incredible expression of love for the outcast. And so anyway, that's what we felt like God was calling us to do. And then we said yes to that. And but then practically it was sort of like, well, how do we do that? How in the heck do we have a church where I don't take a salary? Because I had, at the time I had 2 little boys and my wife and myself to take care of. And it took us a couple of days, and we figured out that what we should do is I would just go get a job in the workforce, and we would meet in homes because then we didn't have to pay rent, and then we could afford to do what God was calling us to do. And so that's exactly what we did. About 11 years ago, we stepped away from full-time ministry. We started a church that started originally in our house. Now it rotates different houses here in Orange County, and we've been giving away the offering to help the poor in our community, and we've been doing that, like I said, 11 years, and it's the best thing I've ever done with the word church on it. It's just been a fantastic experience. I would never ever go back. It's been great.
Wow, that's amazing. So there's another interesting transition that you made that I think is kind of relevant to this film, and it's also the sort of a subject of a book that you recently released. And would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I apologize to everybody. I think I have some allergies or something on all of a sudden my nose is running, so I'm sniffling. I apologize. Anyway, so yeah, I guess the second transition that you're talking about was Again, I was raised in Texas, and I was raised in a Christian home, but also a very strong Republican. So since the moment I was legally able to register to vote, I was voting straight ticket Republican. I joined the NRA. I listened to Rush Limbaugh. I owned 3 firearms. I was as deep as I could be in that reality, and I couldn't imagine being a Christian. In fact, to me, being a Christian was being a good Republican and a good American, um, and so I was very entangled. My politics and my faith were very entangled, and I realized later the Lord started showing me, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, started showing me that I was more American than I was Christian, and that that wasn't a good thing. That I couldn't separate my faith from my politics, and I didn't know where the kingdom of God ended and the United States of America began. And so anyway, slowly I started realizing that the two were not the same thing. That I couldn't really truly say I was following Jesus if I had such a strong allegiance to my nation and um, nationalism and that kind of thing. So slowly, bit by bit, I started praying about it, asking him to show me places in my life that I was entangled, my faith and my politics were entangled, and he began to do that. And then I wrote a book. So the book is called Jesus Untangled, Crucifying Our Politics to Pledge Allegiance to the Lamb. And it's my first book with a publisher. I have self-published other books in the past, but this is my first one with a publisher. And it's been a fantastic experience. I had no way of knowing, honestly, when I was writing the book last year, that when the book came out, the book released on Inauguration Day, January 20th this year. And it's obviously because of the what's been going on in politics and in the church and how the collision of those things. I'm sure the timing has a lot to do with it. To the book has been really, really positive. And in fact, I was just visiting Cincinnati, where I met you face to face, and did a little book event out there. And I've got a couple others scheduled coming up, one in Nashville next month and one in Colorado the month after, and then one in North Carolina in August. So it's been really great. It's been a great experience. And I was expecting a whole lot more from people. I thought I'd get death threats and rocks thrown through my window for writing such a book. But instead, actually, what I mostly received is a whole lot of people coming up to me and saying, thank you for putting into words what I've been thinking and feeling for a long time. So it's actually been very well received.
No, yeah, and I think that it's been a long time coming that a lot of Christians are feeling very disillusioned with that kind of marriage to politics that the church has sort of had in the United States. And I think, yeah, for sure, there's a lot of disillusionment, especially around the current president, who I think is maybe giving people even more of a reason to want to look for alternative ways of looking at these issues.
Yeah.
So I definitely recommend people check out the book, particularly if this is kind of a new idea to them, or if they've been sort of mulling this over but have struggled to find the language to sort of work through these issues. But yeah, it's a great book, and I have it on Kindle, and I got it on Audible as well, which is really convenient. And it's also a physical book as well. So whatever's most convenient for the for the reader.
Yeah. We tried to cover all the bases, actually. So, and I was very excited to get the audiobook out, because I had after when the book first came out, it was only on Kindle and paperback, and I'm all excited. Hey, my book is out. I had so many people come up to me, mostly younger people like your age, because you're younger than me, and but even younger than you, come up to me and say, "Oh, it's great. Is your book on audio?" And I'm like, "No." And people telling me, "Oh, I only read audiobooks," or I only buy audiobooks. So when it finally came out in audio, I was like, finally, okay, great. Now I think I've covered all the bases.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely, I have books in all kinds of formats, but it's definitely very convenient to be able to listen to something while you're driving or at the gym or whatever. So yeah, that's how I actually took in the book myself. So
yeah.
So the connections to the film that we're discussing, I think, will be apparent shortly. But when after I read your book and contacted you, and I got a sense that you were kind of like me, you were sort of a movie buff. I'd asked you if you'd seen this film, and you sort of said, "Oh yeah, I think it's one of my favorite movies." So I was glad to hear that, because this is one I wanted to discuss, and it was definitely very relevant to your book. And maybe I'll just kind of start by sort of asking what was it about this film that you really responded to?
Well, it's funny because this movie came out in '86, right? And so I think I saw it when it came out. And again, because I love Robert De Niro. I'll just say he's probably one of my favorite actors of all time. And I probably watched it when it came out. That like, oh great, this is an opportunity to see De Niro act, and he's a fantastic actor. And I think when I first saw it, again, remember when I watched it, this was way before I was unentangled from my faith in my politics. So I think most of those themes went over my head at the time. I don't think I really picked up when I first watched it on these underlying themes of really, I didn't notice until I watched it again when you approached me about, hey, let's do this. Let's talk about this movie. I go, well, gosh, I got to watch it again. So I borrowed it from my neighbor. He had a copy, and I watched it again a couple of weeks ago. And seeing it now, all of a sudden I'm going, oh, wow, that's why Cody wanted me to watch this movie. Because suddenly I could see now, I'm noticing this. I think what I thought in the beginning, I thought this is a great movie about faith. As I remembered it, I think I remembered it as a film about the tension between the cross and the sword, and respond to violence or to threats using violence and the sword. Do we meet violence with violence, or do we respond to violence with love and nonviolence and that kind of a thing? And I think that's what I came away with the first time I watched it. In general, I think that was, if you had asked me to describe the book, right? If you asked me to describe that movie, a couple of years ago, that's what I would have said. I think, oh, it's a beautiful movie about love and forgiveness and the struggle between choosing the cross or the sword, and those themes are in there. It totally, I wouldn't be wrong, but I think the main theme I didn't really notice until later, which is that actually it is a film about what happens when the church becomes entangled with politics, and a whole lot of people die.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think before we really start discussing a lot of the themes, I might give a very spoilery. So everybody, spoiler alert. If you haven't watched the film yet, yes, and you don't like it being spoiled for you, then watch it first and come back.
Yes.
So I just wanted to give just kind of some basic plot details, so we can kind of go over the structure of the film, so we can then kind of dissect the themes. But so, as I said, the film was released in 1986. Its director, who's one who wasn't too familiar to me actually, was a gentleman named Roland Joffe, I believe, Joffe. However, the guy who wrote it, Robert Bolt, actually wrote a lot of really excellent films. He wrote Lawrence of Arabia, Man for All Seasons, the film about Thomas More, Dr. Zhivago. So he has his name on a lot of great films. The film itself takes place in 1750s, and it's based on some true events, although they sort of add some other things for dramatic reasons or to illustrate a point. But the basics of the setting is that the Spanish and Portuguese are settling in South America, and dividing up the land amongst themselves or between themselves. Jeremy Irons is in the film as a Jesuit priest, Father Gabriel, and he's a major figure in the mission to the natives that are there. De Niro, on the other hand, plays Captain Rodrigo Mendoza, and he's a man-stealer, a slaver, and he kills his brother after catching him in an affair with his wife. Irons is tasked with bringing De Niro through his penance, and by the end of it, De Niro is a faithful Jesuit priest who identifies strongly with the natives that he once kidnapped. So as far as the kind of political stuff that's happening here, basically what's happening is the Spanish have outlawed slavery, but the Portuguese haven't, and the same goes for their territories in this region. But there was sort of part of what's happening here is there's this treaty where the Spanish have kind of ceded some land to the Portuguese, and it's obviously not their land. It's the Guarani, which is the tribe land. And so basically there's kind of this arrangement where the Spanish don't technically allow slavery, but they'll kind of work with the Portuguese and buy slaves from them that they've captured and that kind of thing. So Cardinal Altamirano is a representative of the Catholic Church. He comes to determine whether the church will continue to sponsor and protect the mission, which would mean that they would, basically say, we are going to stand with this tribe. You guys can't kick them out of the land. You can't enslave them. Just leave them alone. So if they do so, though, it's likely going to result in the church, particularly the Jesuit movement, losing its power and influence in Portugal and perhaps all over Europe. And this is the era where the Protestant church is rising, and basically states have different churches they can go to if they don't like what the Catholic Church is doing. So the church decides to close the mission and orders that the Guarani leave, as well as the Jesuits. But De Niro's character and Irons' character, and actually some of the other Jesuits there, decide to stay with the Guarani. But De Niro and Irons split over the best way to respond to the Spanish Portuguese armies that are coming in to violently kill and remove the Guarani. And De Niro basically decides he's going to help them to violently react. And Irons essentially says, well, nonviolence is the answer here.
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly, as I said, a lot of the details aren't necessarily historically accurate. So, for example, I don't think that there's any evidence of Jesuits abandoning their order to remain with the natives, unfortunately. But there are some stories there were some historical events that were kind of similar to that. One that came to mind was Pedro Claver, who was someone in Colombia who was a Jesuit who sided with the slaves that were being brought over from Africa in particular. So it's not completely out of left field, but this particular historical event didn't happen quite the way it happens in the film, but it does allow, by sort of creating these scenarios, it does allow for an exploration of some pretty interesting themes of, faith and violence and the church and state and the influence of power upon the church and those kinds of things. So, a quick note about the aesthetics of it too. I thought visually it was very rich. I mean, regardless of where it's being filmed, the scenes with the Guarani that are sort of more in nature are absolutely stunning. And I remember in the beginning of the film, there's this sort of festival in town, and that's bright and beautiful to watch. And so visually, I thought it was a wonderful film. How did you feel about the aesthetics of it?
Oh, it's beautifully filmed. Yeah, it's certainly there's a lot of very beautiful shots, like aerial shots of the landscape and the forest and the rainforest and stuff. It's gorgeous. It's really beautiful landscape as well as just beautifully filmed. It's funny too because I had remembered this film. I mean, if you'd have asked me before, I would have said, yeah, I think that was a Martin Scorsese film because I really thought it was. And so, in other words, it's not, as you said, it's by Jaffe, but who did The Killing Fields and some other stuff. But yeah, it's very beautifully shot, and the score is amazing too. The music's incredible.
Yeah, I love this. I actually had heard the score before I watched the film, so I was familiar with the score from hearing in other places.
Yeah, and actually, that's what's his name, Ennio Morricone, the guy that did all the spaghetti westerns and stuff, and
oh wow,
fantastic, very well known. What do you call him? Scorer, composer. Thank you.
Yeah. So we could kind of go on to talk about some of the themes that are there a lot. There's a few notes that I have of themes that really stood out to me. I have them under the sort of headings of love, power, violence, and forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There may be other ones that are pretty central that I've missed, but those definitely stood out to me as some of the major thrusts of the film. Maybe I'll kind of jump in on one of them. I'll start with love, and maybe we'll just kind of see where the conversation goes. And anywhere you want to jump in, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
One thing I kind of thought was interesting is that love is portrayed in the film in a very Christian kind of way. So wherein love entails sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
So the beginning of the film, there's this Jesuit priest who goes alone to the natives, and the tribe kills them. The Guarani kills this guy. And
Yeah, that's like the opening of the film is pretty much the guy getting killed.
yeah, he's attached to a cross and then sent down the river down a waterfall. And
Yep.
yeah, so
which by the way, I'm gonna say that's either an amazing stunt or the best rubber doll in the world. Because usually when you watch a movie and they throw like a rubber dummy off of a building or something, you can see it's not real. And you can immediately know, oh, that's a dummy.
Oh yeah.
But when that's shot, I mean, nowadays, if we saw that shot, it's a digital effect. Because because it looks like an actual guy on an actual cross going off an actual waterfall. But
pretty major waterfall too.
And a massive, like a Niagara Falls waterfall, like a freaking crazy waterfall. Now, but you and I know back in 1986, they did not have digital effects that good. And even if it would have fooled someone in 86, it would not fool someone in 2017. We would have looked at it and said, oh, that's obviously a special effect. So it seems like a small thing, but I honestly don't know. How did they do that? Was it a dummy? I hope it wasn't an actual person, because that guy really did die. There's no way somebody could survive that. But
yeah,
shot. It's an amazing way to open the film. It's you certainly, when it happens the first time, you're like, wow.
Yeah, I remember thinking that too, because you definitely didn't feel like it was, because I think it kind of starts. It's almost like a close-up shot, and it comes out, and you're like, okay, that's
the camera's following him as he's floating, and you see, it's a kind of a close-up shot of the guy's face, and then it does a little cut as it's, a wide shot as it's going down, but you can tell from the close-up to the wide shot that's the same guy. I mean, at least it looks like he's moving, and he's, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's almost like it's like a Buster Keaton level stunt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe, I guess I watched this on VHS, because I have a VHS copy. So maybe if I watched it on high definition Blu-ray or something, I would have been able to see that it wasn't. But it definitely looked real to me. But so what kind of comes after that is, so this priest is killed, and the Jesuits decide they're going to go back and try to communicate with this tribe again. So Irons actually originally goes alone, and you've kind of watched this. He's as he's going there, he risks his life both on the journey and in his arrival. And so there's this kind of idea that this love that he has for them entails a certain, at least possible, sacrifice. That to love means you sort of go out of your way and you take a risk. And I remember when he's talking to De Niro later, after he's trying to kind of help him with his penance, De Niro about his brother, and he says, "You loved him, although you chose a strange way to show it."
Yeah.
And there's this idea that, De Niro is a human being, and he knows he can experience love as well, but he doesn't experience love in the right way.
Yeah.
And he experiences love in a very normal and human way, but it's not the way that Christians or that Christ showed love, and it's not the way that we are supposed to show love.
Well, yeah, and so that's a wonderful point, because I think that's one of the very well done, just beautiful. I've studied filmmaking, and I took screenwriting courses and things like that. One of the reasons I love movies, I think, too, as I've gotten more into, I even acted in a couple little local things, but I'm not going to quit my day job. But I marvel as someone who has written screenplays, or at least for assignments. Like I understand what it takes to write a screenplay to get something from paper to screen like that, and when you realize the beautiful way, without saying it, without hitting you over the head with it, you're exactly right. So in the beginning, you have De Niro's character, and you see at the beginning, when you first meet him, he's a slaver. He's capturing people, in nets and selling them like, property. So you get the feeling, oh, this guy's kind of a scumbag. But at the same time, see how much he loves his brother and how much he loves his wife. And then when he, of course, that's his jealousy, is what leads to his jealousy and anger and rage leads to him killing his brother. But you're right. See, he does have love. I mean, the only clue you have is, like as you said, is the scene where Jeremy Irons' character, the Jesuit priest, first encounters De Niro's character, it's after he's killed his brother, and he's kind of sulking and kind of beating himself up in the monastery for what he did. But he doesn't want penance. He's not asking for forgiveness. He kind of says, he acts like he believes he's beyond that. There's nothing for what he's done that would make it better. And then, so yeah, the only clue you get is that line where Iron says, "You loved your brother, but you chose a funny way of showing it." And that's what makes him, I think, if I remember correctly, that's what kind of makes him snap. He grabs the priest and throws him against the wall, right? Like he's gonna kill him too.
Yeah.
But he knows he's right? It's like, I had love, but it was a very selfish love, a very, what we would say, it's eros, or it's maybe phileo, but it's still a conditional kind of love. I love you if you love me back. I love you if you don't color outside these lines.
Well, yeah, it's a love that's very much tainted with, I don't necessarily use a lot of the postmodern language or whatever, but kind of like a toxic masculinity. I mean, he's very concerned about himself and his ego and his insults to his person.
Yep.
And actually that very much connects with, there's that place where he's reading the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, and he reads it out loud. It's in a narration or whatever. It's like a dub, but that sort of represents that he is beginning to learn this new way of thinking about love. And
that's a powerful, pivotal scene where I think because a big part of the film is De Niro's sort of conversion process, right? So we see him in the beginning. He's a slaver. He's ruled by his passions. He kills his brother in a fit of rage. Then he's, sulking and guilty and really on the edge of suicide. He's just like, no reason to live. Through a period of redemption and forgiveness, which we have to talk about that scene in a minute. But he goes through this beautiful scene of redemption and forgiveness. And then on the other side of that, then there's that scene where Jeremy Irons, the Jesuit priest character, hands De Niro a copy of the Bible, and he says, "Read this." And when he opens it, it's 1 Corinthians 13. And then there's this beautiful, it's just beautiful to hear. It's kind of almost like a little montage, because you have a voiceover of De Niro as he's continuing. He reads the whole, if I give myself, give everything I own to the poor, but I have not love, I'm nothing. If I, the whole thing. But as he's reading it, it cuts to, again, like sort of a montage of scenes with him spending time with these very simple villagers, these very simple, not villagers, but simple tribe, who are, again, the quote unquote noble savages. And, but he's playing with the children, and they're having fun, and they're laughing, and they're playing. And then it shows him doing, like he's I think he pulls a thorn out of the foot of a woman who's washing clothes or something on the stream, and that kind of a thing. And images of him getting it, you know what I mean? Understanding this is love, right? It's these simple things, and it's serving other people, and he gets it, right? And so you have this beautiful redemption story of this character who goes from one extreme to another extreme. And that in itself would have been a beautiful, I would say that right there would be most quote unquote Christian films ever made. It would end right there.
Without the complications.
Yes. But then what makes this movie great is that then we introduce a complication where his character now, having gone through all that, is now faced with a choice of, wait a minute, people are going to come in here and kill these people, these natives that I now consider my new family. I love these people. I love these children. I love, the people in this tribe. And then they're going to come and do what to them? They're going to just wipe them out and kill them and enslave them again. And he's like, I can't let that happen. And so he's now has this struggle of, he's grateful because he's made this this journey, spiritual journey, because of the Jesuit faith, because of the Christian faith. But and again, it's a tension between that and his old life, right? His carrying the sword, and violence. That's the way you solve problems. And so it introduces a really interesting complication. And again, that's why I would have said a few years ago that, oh, this movie is about that. And it is about that, but it's also about so much more.
Well, yeah, and I think, when he comes full circle in a sense and comes back to violence, but he does it with a different motivation, a different mindset. It does kind of bring to mind the fact that there are many Christians whose motives are very pure, but whose ways of responding to issues may not be the way Christ wants them to. But so you can look at De Niro and say, in a lot of ways, he's still a very different person than he was in the beginning of the movie, but he finds himself, reinstantiating these same patterns. And so, one thing is this kind of idea, I said, of like masculinity. Early in the film, there's two instances of him using violence, against Europeans anyway, because he starts by kidnapping the Guarani,
Yep.
but are prefaced by him asking, "Are you laughing at me?"
That's right. Yes, that's right.
And so he sort of uses this violence in the beginning to bring himself higher, whereas the violence at the end is not to bring himself higher. It's meant to be a sort of a sacrificial thing he's doing for the Guarani, but he's using sort of these same tools that before were used to destroy and out of pride, and so you can kind of question whether you can use the same tools without consistently with different kinds of motives. And I think in contrast, though, you see Irons, he sort of instantiates like a more Christ-like masculinity, which is different. He's in full command of himself and his choices, but his strength, but in his strength, he chooses not to use violence.
Mm-hmm.
And,
absolutely.
Yeah. So
and here's the thing about this again, where I love that this film asks these questions. I love that the film puts both Jeremy Irons' character, who's the Jesuit priest who is committed to nonviolent love, and takes De Niro's character, who has this incredible experience, and yet in his mind now is using violence not for his own pride or arrogance, but to protect the innocence of people that he loves. And I love that it puts both of them in this place of having to make a choice, and shows you both of their motivations. It doesn't, and again, here's the thing though, it doesn't have a point to make about either one of their decisions, because if it had a point to make, in other words, if it was a film that wanted to be, which is what I thought it was, in my memory, my faulty memory, if it was a film that wanted to make a point about the folly of choosing violence to respond, right? So from a Christian nonviolent standpoint, see, we shouldn't do this, then it would have prejudiced itself. It would have favored one selection or one choice made over the other choice made. And what I realized is that in the end, they both die and they both fail. So whether or not they had all in unison had agreed, all the priests had agreed together, we're not going to fight people, and we're going to die with these people if we have to, and we're going to die singing songs of mercy and forgiveness, which is a beautiful scene where Irons is standing there holding the crucifix and standing with all the children in front of the church, and they're singing, worship songs while they're all getting mowed down, and it's a beautiful and powerful scene. But what you realize is, whether you fight, whether you stand nonviolently and resist, you die. I mean, they died. Both died. Both failed to stop what happened. And so it doesn't have a point to make about the choices, but it just allows them both to make a different choice, and for you to at least understand why they made the choices they made. And it's really up to you as the viewer to determine which one you think. It puts you in that place of like, well, what would I do if I was there? If I was one of those priests and I saw this happening. Well, quite honestly, some of us would say, I'm gonna fight with these people and die with these people. And some of us would say, no, I'm not gonna fight, but I will stand there and I'll force them to, you want to do this, then you're gonna kill me and you're gonna kill little children while I'm worshiping, and make you do that if that's really what you're committed to do. And so it allows the viewer to kind of wrestle with it as well, which I like. You know what I mean? It doesn't force a point on you. It allows you to make a choice and to think about it for yourself, which I think is what a good film really does.
Yeah. I don't think it. I agree with you. I don't think that it necessarily tries to force a certain perspective, though I do think there are places where it signals, at the very least, that we shouldn't view Iron's choice not to fight as a worse choice. That
Right.
we ought to think of it, we ought to. It's at least on the same level, and
Yes.
and so that's sort of at least suggested by the fact that, well, before I go there, maybe I'll say what it kind of brings up is this the practicality of violence and nonviolence, and particularly when you are dealing with a people who is subjugated and who cannot successfully rebel.
Yes.
What is the practical benefit of violence? And in this case, whether they fought or they didn't fight, they die.
Yeah.
And there are some places or sometimes where nonviolence actually is more practically beneficial. I mean, it actually tends to work in some cases where violence doesn't. And part of the reason why, and this is kind of suggested in the film, which suggests that maybe it could have possibly went a different way, is that when you respond with violence, you tend to make the oppressor feel justified.
Oh yeah.
And there's that moment where I don't know, the commander perhaps of one of the armies sees what Irons is doing, sees the nonviolence of some of the Gorani, and he has a genuine crisis of conscience.
Yes.
And he sort of chooses to harden himself against it and to attack nevertheless. But
absolutely. Honestly, thank you for bringing that up, because see, I think that was the point in the film when I thought, wow, okay, where it really does do a beautiful job of this decision to stand with them and sing, worship songs alongside these children in front of the church. Because you're right, there's that scene where the commander is running up the hill, and behind him are several other soldiers, and when they get within earshot of the songs of the children singing, glory to God, they pause, and some of them cross themselves and pray. And it's like it's affecting them. They stop and they say, "Oh, what are we doing?" And in that moment, I thought, well, gosh, what if what if Irons could have successfully convinced the other Jesuits and the other male leaders of the tribe not to fight, but to all stand together. And if the entire tribe had only stood there and not fought back, because as you said, fighting back gives justification for the violence, right? Well, you're fighting us, so I'm sort of defending myself. That's why I had to kill you. But if they were all standing there, is it possible? We don't know. Like it could have at least been possible, as the film suggests to us, that if it had gone differently, that those people would have run up the hill with no resistance and stood there, and been given the order, mow down these children, kill these people who are standing there defenseless as they are singing glory to God, that at least some of those soldiers would have said, I'm not going to do that. Because then you can't justify the violence, right? I was like, I'm just going to slaughter men, women, and children who are just in the process of worshiping God. It's like, again, think about it for like a Catholic. It's like saying to a Catholic, walk into that church during Mass and kill a bunch of other Catholics. What? No way. Why would I do that, right? And so, yeah, you're right. It kind of at least gives you the hope of the possibility of, if they had solidarity, right? If they all together could have not taken up arms, and here's the other thing about it: even if it wouldn't have been "quote unquote" successful, again, we're talking this as a fiction because we know in history what did happen, but at least gives you the possibility that even if it wasn't "quote unquote" successful, even if those soldiers eventually would have just given into, well, I have to obey my orders, right? I'm being commanded to do something, so I'm going to follow my orders, and I'm going to go on and do this horrific thing. That the deaths of those people, yes, they would have died. So if we call success not dying, if success is I didn't die and they didn't kill us and they didn't take over the village or the territory, well, then yeah, we failed. But if success is instead the redemption of the people who are killing you, and I would say those people, if they went through with it, would still have something now to go back home that they would carry back with them in their heart and in their minds to say, that was wrong. That was evil. I will never do that again. You know what I mean? So there would have been a transformational opportunity for the Holy Spirit to do something in the lives and the hearts of those men to at least recognize we did evil today. Because otherwise, again, if you meet violence with violence, as you said, they go home thinking, I didn't do evil today. I did something patriotic for my nation. Because I love my country, I followed orders like a good soldier, and I did something that needed to be done. It was horrible, but it had to be done.
Well, yeah, and actually, I think that there's a hint of what could have happened in De Niro's penance early in the film, because his penance that he chooses for himself is to carry around this like heavy burden. It's like this big sack filled with, metals and things like that.
Isn't it? But not just metals though. I think it's actually armor.
I think you're right. It is armor.
He's carrying like a conquistadorian kind of like helmets and breastplate and shield and sword, right? And we know he has. So it's like a lot of stuff and it's a lot of other junk too, but you can it's rattling like metal. So yeah, it is kind of like weapons.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, because maybe it's symbolic of the burden of violence that he's carrying with him. Yeah. So so in the Jesuits, Irons basically says, well, as long as you want to carry this thing around, do it. As long as you feel like you need to do it, do it. Mm-hmm. Whereas the other priests are like, no, we need to stop him. We need to tell him to cut it out. And Irons, whole point is, and I like this because it's kind of an approach, I think, to how we should think about evangelism sometimes. It's not something we can force on somebody. We basically are just there to help shoulder the burden until they're ready to release it. And so that's kind of what happens with Irons. There's points where he has to help De Niro, even though he thinks it's very silly for him to be carrying around this burden of his guilt, which is what it is representing anyway. Yeah. He's willing to help him shoulder it. Yeah. And but I think I think it may be, I don't remember if it's one of the priests says, explicitly, how long is he going to carry that stupid thing?
You know what? It's Liam Neeson, by the way.
Is it Neeson? Okay, I couldn't remember if it was Neeson.
Yeah, he's in this film, and you almost don't. I think it must have been one of his first films because he's not one of the top billed actors.
No, he's not. He's in there some, but he's definitely not one of the major characters. And what's interesting is, while De Niro is at one point carrying this thing up a cliff as they're traveling, it almost kills him. And Irons grabs him as he's about to fall and pulls him up. Yep. And, it kind of represents this idea that unreleased guilt is destructive. He if he doesn't get rid of this thing, it's going to kill him. And, like I said, Irons doesn't force him. He helps him up. He quietly supports him. And he partners with him and shows the patient love of Christ, which I think is beautiful. In the moment where De Niro finally is willing to get rid of it, because at one point one of the priests tries to cut it off.
No, actually, Liam Neeson's character does. He gets disgusted with this guy because first of all, he's slowing them down, and again, he keeps falling and getting up and falling and getting up and falling. And Liam Neeson takes a little dagger and cuts the rope, and it rolls down the hill. And then De Niro's character walks back down the hill, rope again, and comes right and carries it right back up again. And that's when, Jeremy Irons' character tells Liam Neeson's character, we can't, this is his burden to carry. We have to let him do it until he can forgive himself.
And the point at which he forgives himself, it's not a realization he makes. What actually happens is they finally get to the Guarani. And which by the way, just in case we remind everybody, they get to the Guarani, who are the tribe of people that he has been capturing and enslaving. Yeah. And you get a sense, even though you can't understand what they're saying, that they may recognize him.
Oh, yeah, they do. Yeah. They're like, oh, that's him. Because actually the little kids do it first. Yeah. The little kids are watching what's happening, and they look at each other and they say something, and they run over to the of the tribe, and they tell him something, and then he's like, so you get that realization of, oh, it's that guy. Yeah. He's the guy that's been capturing our people.
And even though, De Niro's hasn't really, that at the very least he's feeling the guilt over killing his brother, you get a sense that the slavery is what he's done as a slaver is also connected to that guilt. He sort of talks about it a little bit. And and what happens is one of the natives comes over to him with a knife, and at first you think he's going to slit his throat, and he seems like he may do it. And De Niro is perfectly willing to let him do it. He feels
he's actually closing his eyes.
He deserves this.
Yeah, he closes his eyes like, yes, this is what I deserve.
Yeah. And instead, the native cuts the burden off. The Guarani cuts the
Yes.
rope.
Yes.
And
yeah. It's one of the most beautiful scenes
yeah,
in that movie. If anyone has ever seen that movie, that's the one scene you come away with that you'll never get out of your mind, because it's such a beautiful, again, most Christian movies would end right there. It's such a beautiful scene of redemption, because again, one of the priests cut the rope a long time ago, earlier. And he crawled back down and pulled it back up. It's the difference is it's who cut the burden. The person who cut the burden off was someone who should, by all rights, have killed him, who should have hated him, right? You've taken my brothers and my children and my sisters as slaves. You've taken them away from me. How in the world could this guy forgive him? But he does. And so it's that realization, that's where De Niro's character finally breaks. It's honestly, what's funny is De Niro's character doesn't forgive himself. You don't ever have the point where he says, okay, I forgive myself for killing my brother. Receives forgiveness from someone who by all rights should hate him. And it's because that person forgives him. That's why he forgives. That's why he receives mercy and grace, because he knows he doesn't deserve it, but it's so beautiful, right? It's Christ. It's the love and forgiveness of Christ. And that scene when he cuts it off and rolls down the hill. Huh?
I think he throws it into the river. He kicks it into the river or something like that.
Yeah, he kicks it and it rolls down the hill into the river, into the river below. And then De Niro's character just starts weeping and sobbing. It's beautiful. I'm crying listening, remembering it. It's so beautiful. And then the tribe comes around him, the children come around him, and they hug him. And it's just this beautiful scene of redemption and forgiveness. And then you realize, okay, let's back this up. If at the beginning of the movie, the Jesuits had given up on that tribe because, they keep killing our missionaries. I mean, they're killing our missionaries. Well, the missionaries forgive the tribe, and they continue to come in devotion and love, sincere love for these people, because they want to bring them the gospel. Well, that gospel then takes root to the point that these tribesmen, these people in this tribe, see the man responsible for their hardship, and they instantly forgive him. Why did they forgive him? Because they've been touched with the gospel. They've been transformed with the love of Jesus. They know, the priest doesn't tell them what to do. He's watching. You even see him, okay, what's going to happen? He has no idea what's going to happen. Okay, what's going to happen? How are they going to react now that they know who this guy is? And so when they cut that bird, it was their decision, because the gospel he had brought to that tribe had taken root and transformed those tribesmen and those people to the point that they're willing to forgive. And so their forgiveness results in his redemption and his forgiveness. It's beautiful.
Which I think perhaps points to what could have happened at the end of the film. If they had been unified in their response of love and forgiveness, how it might have transformed the Spanish and Portuguese armies. Maybe not, but maybe.
Yeah, and so there is a point in the film. I wonder if, again, this is very subtle, and we're talking about a movie, but it's possible that the fact that De Niro's character wants to fight is pivotal in the rest of the tribe fighting also. Like, in other words, I think they looked up to him. He had become someone in the tribe that he loved them like family, but they also loved him like family. And because he and Liam Neeson's character, the other priest, decide we're going to fight, that it sways the tribe to fight. And that if De Niro could have the priests, if all the other priests had just stood their ground and said no, that it might have worked, because as you said, they've already shown mercy once to a guy they have no reason to show mercy to. Like, they probably could have swayed, them not to fight. You don't know. Again, it's a gray area, but it gives you, again, that hope of what could have been.
Well, and I there's kind of a theme that's here, that I think is biblical, although I think it can also be carried too far, which is Christ's identification with the oppressed.
Yeah.
And I think, De Niro, I think, shows how that identification can be used incorrectly. Because, what sort of happens in, like a lot of Marxist kind of thinking is that, you identify, this is the oppressor, I am the oppressed. Now I will use their tools against them and I will become like them, but I'm still justified because I've put myself in this category.
Yep.
And, so there's that I think is the wrong use of that kind of thinking. But
yeah.
At the same time, there is, like in Matthew 25, that idea that, where the poor or the hurting or the naked or the hungry are, or the prisoner, Jesus is there. So I think that's definitely there.
Yeah.
And in this film, I think you see that because the church, which, in traditional Catholic thought is the representative of God, is in the wrong here. And it's really by De Niro and Irons disobeying their orders.
Yep. Because they're ordered by the cardinal to leave, and they both are disobeying the church by saying we're not leaving. Yeah. But what's different is their response to
sure,
we're all not leaving, but what are we going to do?
Sure. But the initial idea that we are going to identify with these people, it is by disobeying that first initial disobedience that they are actually following Christ.
Right.
And, so being a Christian in this case, and in many cases, means identifying with the outcast over siding with structures of power which victimize them.
Yeah.
And I think that, comes in, you really see that, I think, with this whole idea of where the Jesuit missionaries and the natives are sort of caught in this tug of war with these three parties that are vying for power: Spain, Portugal, and the church. And the church is the one that you shouldn't be there.
Exactly. Yeah. That's where the entanglement comes in, is that I realized that, wow, it's because the church is mixed up in the political stuff going on between Spain and Portugal. I mean, in the end, that's why this whole village gets wiped out.
Yeah.
If they weren't involved in what was going on between these governments, this probably could have been completely avoided.
Well, and also you're at the end of the film, after Cardinal Altamirano finds out that they have wiped out these Guarani, and he sort of asks the Spanish governor Don Cabeza, was that necessary? And he says, yes, given the legitimate purpose which you sanctioned.
Yes, which you sanctioned. Yes.
Yeah. So the church is guilty. It is responsible for what's taken place because they were more concerned with holding on to power now in this life than with following Christ. And I think that is kind of what's happening. The church and the Spanish government, the Portuguese government, and De Niro, his character, are essentially secular. They only see what is happening right now in this life.
Yeah.
And by being so short-sighted, not being able to look forward, and De Niro, I mean, his short-sightedness is very short-sighted because he knows they're going to die. So it's really, I mean, it's a useless cause to begin with.
Exactly.
It's that sort of short-sightedness that allows this evil to take place.
Yeah.
And I think, the reality is that when you aren't seeking to protect your power, you can do what is just and good. And it's that desire to maintain power that creates these divided loyalties between Christ and something else.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Yeah, I think one thing that I thought was interesting too was, and you can't help but compare this film to Silence. I saw Silence on the plane back from Cincinnati. So it's
very
fresh. Huh?
And that actually is a Scorsese film.
And Liam Neeson is in both films, and that is a Scorsese film. You're right, and it's also both about Jesuits.
Yeah, and it's a period film where Liam Neeson plays a Jesuit.
Yeah. And so, what's interesting, comparing those two films, is realizing that the Jesuits themselves, the priests on the ground, who are in the process of bringing the gospel to the natives, they are oblivious to the fact that they are pawns in a political game. And if you ask them, this is only about bringing the love of Jesus to people who have never heard it. And that's why they're willing to die for it and give their lives for it. That this is all they care about. And then films, you have the moments where the Jesuits realize, my government is actually using these missionary efforts as a way of essentially colonialism. It's a way to advance the colonialistic tendencies of the empire that I'm born into, and they're willing to let us die, and even to let these people die. Though that blood to be shed, in the hopes that eventually, Portugal or Spain or Holland or England would be able to gain some kind of a foothold in this nation and eventually gain some kind of influence over that nation and those people and gain power. That ultimately, because they realize it, but they don't realize it in time. They realize it too late when they're already so invested in what they think they're doing. And then they realize, oh, that's not really like maybe what I'm doing, but someone else has another motive. And in the process, a lot of people are getting killed.
Yeah.
But by then it's too late. Like you can't do anything about it. You've submitted yourself to the authority of your government. And now this thing is set in motion, and a lot of people are going to die in the process. And then you and I were talking before the recording. You brought up an really interesting point about the difference between people, the natives that we see in the mission, who are, again, the quote unquote noble savages, right? They're like Stone Age people. They'd never seen an oboe before. They'd never.
Well, they talk about Eden.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. They compare it to Eden.
And they're what sort of makes them amenable to irons is that he plays, is it a lute or something for them?
Yeah,
and
he plays an oboe.
An oboe. Yeah. So music soothes the savage beast kind of thing.
Right, and it's also. Yeah, it's a pivotal moment too, because again, in the beginning of the mission, we see a missionary being killed. You get the feeling a lot of missionaries have been killed. Jeremy Irons again says, I have to go up there to those people anyway. So in love, he goes up again, risks his life. But the way he woos them, as you said, he pulls out this oboe and he starts playing the music. And they, these warriors with their bows drawn and their spears ready to throw to kill him, they're going to do the same thing to him that they've done to every other missionary. But now, because he's playing this music, they put their weapons down and they come out of the bushes and they surround him in awe and beauty and just that sound, right? And then the music is what softens their heart, right? Which gives him this inroad. And that's kind of what breaks everything down, that now he's able to share the gospel with them, which is also pivotal for the end of the film. And one of these beautiful things that come back later, because at the end of the film, everyone's dead, except for a few children who are left alive, and so little boys and girls, adolescent age, who are left alive after the carnage, and they get in a canoe and they start to go down the river. But a little girl jumps out, laying there, and she picks up a violin and gets back in the boat, and they go away. And it's like that's the only thing they take with them. That's the only thing that value that they felt like these children felt like, well, let's keep the music they brought us, right? That was beautiful. Let's keep the instruments. But they don't keep the religion. I think that's what the film is trying to say. They don't continue to keep the religion. They don't continue to keep the politics and all that stuff. They in other words, seem to be the children seem to be the only one who recognize, oh, this is what happens. Things get mixed together. Look what happened. Everyone's dead. We give up. We're abandoning that. We're going to just go this other direction.
Yeah. And I think, there are those sort of two extremes in which you can think about the relationship of European power to the rest of the world. And one of them is, that these other people are noble savages, and the other one is that they're wicked heathens.
Yes.
And I think then there's the counter as well. So if the natives are these noble savages, then we're these people, Europeans or whatever, those who have lost sight of what's really good, and we've lost sight of what's valuable, and we're sort of corrupted. But on the other hand, if they're these wicked heathens, then we're bringing this sort of civilized message to them. And I don't think that the mission goes quite to that extreme, and I don't think Silence on the other side goes to that the other extreme quite that far either. But there is a difference in that in the mission, Westerners are the oppressor, and in Silence, they are being oppressed. And so there is sort of a difference in how, and the thing is too, we're looking at this after hundreds of years of all these stereotypes and ways of thinking about this that may not be at all intentional in either film, but it is certainly a difference. and how those things
Well,
are approached.
here's interesting. So I'm thinking about what you just said about how in the mission, who's doing the oppressing and who's being oppressed. But in silence, yeah, it's the Japanese government who is
But the
doing the
Japanese
oppressing.
people are also, yeah.
But it's the Japanese people. In other words, it doesn't matter. And the Japanese people the Japanese government is doing the oppressing, but only because they have this invasive, toxic, Catholic Church swaying the hearts of their people. And here's the thing: the difference between the natives in the mission and the natives in silence. The natives in silence, the Japanese culture is much more advanced. They're not a bunch of savages. They're very intelligent. They're very smart. They're very savvy. And because of that, they know exactly what's going on. They see this as, oh, this isn't just some nice little, these people, they're so nice to our people. They're coming and bringing this beautiful religion of peace. Isn't that great? No, they get it. They understand, oh, this is Portugal's attempt, a subversive attempt to infiltrate our culture and gain political influence over our nation. That's why they're killing these people, because they don't want that influence from the outside coming in and taking over their, infiltrating their culture. That's how the Japanese, they get it. They see it. And the funny thing is, they see it and the Jesuits don't.
Mm-hmm.
What happens in silence is the Inquisitor explaining in every way he knows how to this Jesuit priest that this is what's really going on. You think you're bringing the gospel to these people, but what you don't understand is, no, you're not. You are helping your government gain a foothold in Japan for political reasons, political purposes. And that's why these people are dying. They're dying because of the church influence. And if the church influence was removed, nobody would die. And so it's still, either way, right? The reason people are dying at the end of the day is because the church is complicit in this kind of colonialism. And that's why people end up getting killed. The innocent in the middle, innocent people in the middle, they're the ones who die and suffer and die.
I saw Silence when it was in theaters. I know you've seen it more recently.
Yeah.
I don't remember a lot of the political discussion. The thing I kind of recall more was this idea. They said that, we've looked at your Christianity and we're just not interested in it. We don't think it's going to take hold in Japan. So they do welcome some foreign invasiveness, but only some.
Right.
So there's some limitation of the kind of trade they're going to do. And I think probably, obviously, a lot of it has to do with this idea of Japanese cultural sovereignty.
Yes.
At the very least, that we're going to decide what can come in and what can't.
Yeah, but I get the feeling, and again, I don't think I'm projecting on it. I believe there's dialogue in silence that talks. They see this religion as being a threat to the hearts and minds of the people. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
This is a some leverage that Portugal and Spain and England and Holland, because they're the ones sending the missionaries, that they're attempting to exert this political, power over them. That's why they're so. Because here's the thing: they make a big deal in silence about the fact that, oh, there were hundreds of thousands of Christians here before you killed them all and slaughtered them all. So it's like, well, we had at one point we had this very huge foothold here, and then this is what you don't get. Yes. And when you got that big and that powerful, where there were like 100,000 or 200,000 Christians in Japan, that's when the Japanese government said, wait a minute here. This is not just a couple of little Christians in a village over here in a fishing village like a couple hundred people. This is several 100,000. And then they recognize, you know what, this is only going to continue. And pretty soon we're going to lose a grip on our own nation, on the hearts and minds of our own people. We've got to stop this now. Like, this is the reason why nope, we got to put an end to this. We got to stop this.
Well, and I certainly do think that Christianity is, I think, viewed with enough suspicion when it's coming into a place where it's never been before. Yeah. But when it's specifically connected with a power structure,
yes,
that I think makes it a lot more suspicious. And in the case of the mission, that power structure ends up being very detrimental. And so you sort of see these people, the Guarani, a lot of them who've converted to Christianity, and they're being told by the cardinal that they should learn to submit to the will of God. And the will of
Yes.
God is defined as you need to leave your land because we said so.
Right.
And the idea is, we are the representatives of God on earth. And I think the chief responds through translation, Irons sort of communicates his words as, he doesn't think you speak for God, he thinks you speak for the Portuguese.
Yes.
And
that's a beautiful moment, because that moment right there says, okay, again, the people get it. The people there on the ground, the people, the tribes people, they clearly see what's going on. They're not confused at all. You come here and tell us things that seem to benefit not God. Why would God want us to leave the land he gave us? Right? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, their idea is, that it was God's will to establish the mission. Why would he now be telling us to leave?
Why did he change his mind? Exactly.
Yeah, why did he change his mind? Yeah. And it is that, and I think, there is the political religious entanglement, but I think also we would acknowledge, as broadly Protestant and Baptist influenced Christians, that there's also a great deal of danger when you have, it's the Catholic Church is not just their political entanglements, but through history, but also this idea that they get to speak for God. And I think what ends up happening is you have people who, for whether their reason or their experience or their careful reading of Scripture, whatever the case may be, they're convinced that God has said this, and then the church comes in and says, "Oh, actually, that's not what God says," and so they're left in this place where they either are going to go along with what the church is saying, whether it's actually right or wrong, or they have to abandon the church, and so that's one of these other dangers of entanglement, is that the Jesuits have not brought just Christ, they have brought Roman Catholicism.
Yes. And that is always the problem, right? We end up at not only importing, we don't just bring the gospel in our missionary efforts. We do bring our culture. We do bring our assumptions. Our own faith is entangled itself. So we're bringing an entangled faith when we bring it, unfortunately. We're not just bringing the gospel, we're also bringing morals and our culture, and like it or not. I mean, I think you'd have to be really vigilant, in yourself, if you were a missionary, to say, I only want to bring them the gospel, and I'm not going to impose my suppositions upon them. That's really hard to do. I think sorry to go back to silence again. And again, I may be projecting onto silence something that it may not be trying to say, but I think it illustrates the possibilities.
You see it more recently than I have, so it's very possible that I'm just not remembering it quite the same way.
Well, okay. Well, tell me if you remember this, if you agree with this assessment. At the end of silence, feeling, I mean, this is what I got, that the real mistake that the Jesuits made was their method of bringing the gospel. In other words, it was the fact that the method they chose, and they had faith in it. They stuck with it to the very end, even to the point of dying for it. Was this, the traditional way of, you come in, you share the gospel, you build a church, you have them go through mass, you do the whole thing, you give them all the icons and the crosses and the blah blah blah, right? Okay, so obviously in Japan that didn't work. But what does work? Well, what seems to me, again, I don't know if I'm projecting, but it seems to me what silence seems to be suggesting, at least in theory, is the idea that, what would have worked? What if they had changed their tactic, and what if they instead had just sent people in who became tradesmen, who taught English, or had some kind of a trade there in Japan. They took a Japanese wife. They had and then just slowly, quietly, one-to-one, they started sharing the gospel with people. In other words, underneath the radar of the government, not outwardly, not building some big church building on the corner, not walking around with crosses around their necks and that kind of stuff. But in other words, I'm saying, because that's what seems to work in silence. It seems like are kind of forced. They don't get it, but they're sort of forced into this way of living. And then suddenly, now that they're living as a Japanese person in the Japanese culture, they're slowly having an influence on the people around them as they just quietly live a Christ-like life, quietly share their faith one-to-one. It's like, oh, maybe that would have been a better tactic. And then maybe a bunch of people wouldn't have died.
Well, even there, though, there's a kind of corruption, because when these priests arrive to some of these villages where there are these secret Christians, they say, we haven't been able to keep communion because we haven't had a priest. We haven't been able to do confession because we haven't had a priest.
Yes.
And there's this whole idea that without this chain of command, without this power structure, Christ can't be there.
Which is crazy. Yeah.
And at the end of Silence, of course, it's Christ is actually present wherever the powerless and disenfranchised and hurting are.
Yeah.
That's where you find Christ. You don't find Christ in
priests
and the priesthood and I think there's a little something to that in the mission as well. And you see sort of Jeremy Irons at the end of the film seems that he's gotten that to some degree. And when De Niro asks him for a blessing as he's going to lead these armies of Gorani, Irons responds, if you're right, you'll have God's blessing. If you're wrong, my blessing won't mean anything. And
it's beautiful. Yeah.
It's beautiful, but it also undermines the claims of, I think, and I don't want to be too hard on my Catholic friends, but I think it undermines the claims of the sort of magisterial viewpoint of the church, where we are, I'm thinking of the magisterium, the idea of the authority within the church gets to speak for God. And De Niro looks to Irons because he's his sort of father in the faith, and he's his, the sort of the head of this particular Jesuit community. But Irons basically says, my opinion doesn't ultimately matter. What matters is God's opinion.
Yeah, and though, I would challenge, though, I agree. I think it's kind of cool what he says there, because as you're pointing out, he's challenging the authority of the church, and as we've already pointed out, they all of the priests in this situation defy to do what they think really Jesus would want them to do, which is not to obey the church, but to obey what they think is what Christ would do, which is to stand with these people who have now become part of their family. But at the same time, that statement that Irons makes, that if God is if you're doing what God wants, you'll be successful and you'll be blessed. But if you're not, my blessing won't mean anything. But on another level, what that says is that, okay, let's suppose De Niro had been right and he had slaughtered a bunch of people and killed all the, does that mean that was right? In other words, so let's flip it around. So what ends up happening is then these soldiers who come in, who wipe out men, women, and children and kill every last one of them, were they right? Because they won. Their sword prevailed, so that must mean they were right, right? And so the point of the film is actually, no, it doesn't matter who won the battle. God's approval is not revealed by who has the more powerful army or who slays the most people in the battle. All right, yeah. That's a very, I think that has nothing to do with who's really right or wrong.
Yeah, I think I may have read something a little different into blessing, which was that God can bless you and you can still fail. So but maybe what De Niro was asking for was, I want God's blessing so I'll be successful, and that very well could be what he meant by that. But I didn't read that quite into that, but or I didn't understand that that's what he was saying. Yeah, and I'll we're getting pretty far into this. I wanted to end by well, I want you to be able to say whatever you want to say, but there's one thing that if you wanted to finish up in any way, Irons points out this dichotomy early in the film. I think it's Irons when he contrasts the everlasting mercy of God and the short-lived mercy of man. And I think if you were to sort of look for a very simple theme in the film, I think that quote kind of summarizes it in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is one of my favorite films. I love it, and it's it's not completely perfect. There's things you could quibble over, but you know,
Can I suggest something real quick?
yeah.
When I watched it again most recently, a couple of weeks ago, I thought, you know, would have been a really cool ending. Tell me what you think. I thought interesting, at least if it had ended. Maybe this is just me again wanting to project something onto it, but so there's the scene again where at the end, you know, De Niro's sword comes back to him because one of the boys who looks up to him goes down into the river, finds that bag of crap that he had pulled up that they had cut off of him, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the burden. This was part of his sin.
The weight of his guilt.
Yeah. That tribe, in obedience to Christ, had forgiven him of and cut it off and rolled it. And that was the reason he became a Christian. It's the reason he had a change in his life. And so the little boy who looks up to De Niro, the mountain, digs out, you know, finds this rusted, muddy sword, carries it back up to De Niro and hands it to him. And there's that moment where De Niro looks at the boy and he looks at the sword, it back. And then that is the moment like, you're in other words, you're undoing your salvation. You're undoing the moment of redemption. You know, you're going back to that thing that you would cut off. And it's interesting that it's someone in the tribe who actually not only gives him so that he can experience redemption, it's also someone in the tribe who brings that sword back up out of the muck and hands it to him.
Well, it's interesting then is that, you know, early in the film, the sword makes sense to him. But at this point, he sees it for what it is, but he still takes it back. It's rusty, it's dirty, it's covered in muck. There's
real quick. There's a part, though, then, where at the end, where he's laying there dead, right? And the same boy who handed him the sword is standing over his dead body. And the boy looks around at all the carnage and looks down at De Niro, this man he had idolized, right? And had been like a father figure to him. And I thought, wouldn't it have been interesting if he had reached down and taken up the sword that he had handed to De Niro and looked at it and then dropped it and then taken the cross from around and taken that with him. In other words, if that little boy had learned something in that moment of saying, okay, that sword didn't win, didn't prevail, and I'm rejecting that sword, I'm going to take the cross. Like, I know, and the ending does something different. The ending has the children not take a cross, not take a sword, violin, and go off, which is sort of a middle ground kind of a thing. But I thought that would have been an interesting, even if the little boy had at least picked up the sword and looked at it and realized, oh, wow, that's all this is good for, right? This sword helped to create this destruction.
Sure, and there'd be the contrast of the
that would
sword
have been an
and the
interesting
cross.
scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my director's cut.
I like that. That's good.
That's
good. Well, and I had a note here, but I didn't really get around to mentioning it. But the thing with the sword, you know, it's interesting to me that De Niro early in the film, after he's converted, won't kill a pig.
Yes.
When he's asked to, but by the end of the film, he's ready to kill men again.
Yes.
That's
a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So Keith, I'd like you to one more time remind people where they can about your book and where they can find more information about you if they're interested in learning a little bit more about you, reading more what you've done, and that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah, you just go to my blog is my name. It's just KeithGiles, KeithGiles.com. And then on my blog there, you'll find links to my book. Or you go to Amazon. Jesus Untangled is available there on Amazon, and you can check that out. And so thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. This has been fun.
Oh, it was really fun. I really appreciated you doing it. It was really a lot of fun. Well, it was fun. It's kind of a heavy movie, but it was fun. Thank you, Keith.
Interesting talking about stuff like this. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. You know, and I think I started doing this just because as someone who loves films and who loves the gospel, I think that there's a lot of great movies that explore these themes better than I think in a lot of cases better than some of the films that are coming out of the Christian media world. But this is one that I think
I would say better in every case. It's like you know what, you and I should do a podcast where we just discuss why Christian movies are so bad and why movies like this that are not quote unquote Christian movies do a much better job of communicating the power and the truth of the gospel. And why is it Christians can't get it? Why can't we make movies like The Mission or Silence or that kind of thing?
Well, I'll tell you what.
That in itself is an interesting topic.
Absolutely. Well, actually,
Okay.
I'm on my wish list for future podcasts is to do a double header to discuss Silence and The Shack, because they both deal with the Odyssey and suffering and where's God and all this mess kind of stuff. But
Okay, yeah.
So kind of contrast them.
Yeah, that's good.
Maybe that's something we'll talk about at some point, if you've got some time on your schedule.
Love to do this again, man. I love talking about movies, and this is fun. So anytime you want to do it, let's set something up.